The slap of skin against skin echoed through the hospital lobby like a gunshot, and for 3 full seconds, nobody in that waiting room breathed. Dr. Marcus Vane, CEO of Blackstone Memorial, stood over a nurse half his size, his hand still raised, her cheek already blooming red, and not one sound left her lips. Not a gasp. Not a cry. Nothing. That silence terrified people more than screaming ever could have. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet strength of people the world overlooks, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me you're watching, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Midnight Tales, because this story is about to change the way you see the person standing quietly in the corner of every room. Her name was Elena Cruz, and for the 11 months she'd worked the night shift at Blackstone Memorial, not a single person had heard her voice. The other nurses assumed she was mute. The doctors assumed she was slow, or shy, or simply strange, and Marcus Vane, a man who had inherited his father's hospital empire and none of his father's patients, assumed she was beneath his notice entirely, until the night she stood between him and a patient he wanted quietly discharged before the man's insurance ran out. Elena had seen the chart. She had seen the internal bleeding the attending physician missed. She had planted her feet in front of a gurney and refused to move, and when Vane grabbed her arm to shove her aside, she still said nothing, only tightened her grip on the bed rail like it was the last solid thing in the world. That was when his hand came up. That was when the lobby went silent. That was when a security guard named Ruiz, a man who had worked nights at Blackstone for 6 years, felt something cold settle in his stomach, because he was one of the only people alive who knew exactly who Elena Cruz used to be. 3 years earlier, Elena had not been a nurse who didn't speak. She had been a combat medic, callsign Sparrow, attached to a joint special operations unit that didn't officially exist on paper. She had pulled 11 men out of a collapsed building in the mountains of a country nobody back home could point to on a map, working with 2 broken ribs and a bullet graze along her collarbone, and she hadn't stopped, hadn't slowed, hadn't made a sound the entire time, because sound gave away position, and position got people killed. The silence wasn't a disability. It was a discipline, carved into her by years of learning that the loudest thing in a war zone is often the thing that gets you and everyone around you killed. She had come home from that final mission with a silver star nobody knew about, a team of men who owed her their lives, and a version of silence that had simply never worn off. Civilian life didn't need code discipline, but trauma doesn't check paperwork before it moves in and stays. She took the nursing job at Blackstone because it let her save people the quiet way, the way she understood best, tucked into corners, watching monitors, catching the things everyone else missed. She never once mentioned what she used to be. She didn't think anyone would believe her, and worse, she didn't think anyone would care. But somebody had been watching. The man on that gurney, the one she refused to let die quietly for the sake of a hospital's quarterly numbers, was the father of a soldier from her old unit, a young man named Diaz who had walked out of that collapsed building alive because Sparrow refused to leave anyone behind. When Diaz got the call that his father had been rushed to Blackstone Memorial and was about to be discharged against medical advice, he didn't call a lawyer. He called the only number that still mattered to men who had served under Elena's silent, steady hands. He called his old command. So when Marcus Vane's palm connected with Elena Cruz's face in front of a lobby full of witnesses, he had no idea he had just struck a woman with an entire chain of command still watching over her, still bound to her by the kind of loyalty that doesn't fade just because the uniform comes off. Ruiz, the security guard, was already backing away from the CEO with his hand near his radio, not because hospital policy told him to, but because 20 minutes earlier he had gotten a text from an unknown number that simply read, "Eyes on Sparrow. Stand by." He hadn't understood it then. He understood it now, as the low, distant thud of rotor blades began vibrating through the windows of the lobby. The patients heard it first, a rhythmic pounding that rattled the glass doors and grew louder by the second, and then the parking lot outside lit up under a spotlight so bright it turned night into noon. A matte black helicopter dropped out of the rain-heavy sky and touched down across 3 handicapped parking spaces like the men inside had stopped caring about rules a long time ago. The doors slid open before the skids even fully settled, and 6 men in full tactical gear moved out in a formation so practiced it looked choreographed, rifles slung, faces set, moving not like soldiers storming a target but like men rushing to the side of someone they loved. Marcus Vane's hand was still raised when the doors of the lobby blew open and the man at the front of that formation, a broad-shouldered veteran with a scar through one eyebrow, stopped 2 feet from him and simply said one sentence loud enough for the entire lobby to hear, that if he ever touched Sergeant Elena Cruz again, there would not be a hospital board large enough to protect him. Behind that man, Elena finally looked up, and for the first time in 11 months, the people around her saw her eyes fill with something other than that careful, guarded stillness. She saw Diaz's father breathing steady on the gurney beside her. She saw Ruiz, quietly proud, arms crossed. She saw 6 men who had once trusted her with their lives standing in a hospital lobby because word had traveled that someone had raised a hand against the woman who never left anyone behind. Elena Cruz did not raise her voice that night either. She didn't need to. She simply reached out, checked the pulse of the man on the gurney one more time, adjusted his foreline with hands that hadn't shaken once through the entire confrontation, and said, quietly, that he needed to stay admitted for observation, and that this time, nobody was going to argue with her. Vane, pale and shaking, said nothing at all. There was nothing left for him to say. In the weeks that followed, the story of that night spread through the hospital, then the city, then far beyond it. Elena never asked for an apology, never asked for a promotion, never even asked to be believed. She simply kept working nights, the same quiet way she always had, except now, when she walked down the hallway, people didn't wonder about the silent nurse in the corner anymore. They understood that some of the strongest people in the room are the ones who never needed to raise their voice to be heard, because their actions had already been speaking, all along, in a language far more powerful than words. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that quiet people often carry the loudest kind of strength, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear that second chances are real and that kindness is never wasted, even on the people who seem to need it least. Before we go, I want you to comment one word below that describes how this story made you feel. I read every single one, and I will be right here waiting for you in the next Midnight Tales story, where another silent hero steps forward when the world least expects it.